The Grand Hall of Sheikh Ibrahim al-Hassan's palace was built to silence anyone who stepped into it. Marble floors stretched wide, gleaming under a cascade of golden chandeliers that hung like constellations trapped in glass. Imported Persian rugs softened footsteps, and carved cedar panels lined the walls, etched with verses in flowing Arabic calligraphy. It was a hall where power lived, where every chair seemed to whisper stories of empires, trade, and inheritance. And on this day, it was the stage for a gathering unlike any other. Ivy curtains swayed as dignitaries, lawyers, and family members entered, their polished shoes tapping against the marble. Sons and daughters, nephews and nieces, cousins who had spent years circling the sheikh like hawks waiting for meat, all filed in with carefully painted smiles. They adjusted their expensive suits, straightened their designer dresses, and whispered behind manicured hands. They had all come for one reason: wealth. Sheikh Ibrahim, a man of immense fortune and influence across the Middle East, had summoned them for what many assumed would be the unveiling of his will. Rumors of failing health had spread, and with those rumors came greed. At the far end of the hall, upon a raised platform, stood an ornate chair carved from ivory and mahogany. It wasn't just a chair, it was a throne, and on it sat Sheikh Ibrahim himself. His robe was white, clean as snow, and a dark bish trimmed in gold rested on his shoulders. His beard was silver, but his eyes were sharp, piercing, the eyes of a man who had built an empire out of sand and vision. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply watched his family and guests as they arranged themselves in rows before him. Among them, unnoticed and nearly invisible, was a woman in a grey maid's uniform. Her name was Layla. She kept her head lowered, carrying a silver tray of dates and water, her steps light, her presence muted. She had worked in the palace for just over a year, and though many of the household staff spoke among themselves freely, Layla rarely said more than a few words. Her duties were simple: serve, clean, remain invisible, and she obeyed. No one in the room paid her attention, except for the occasional disdainful glance from a cousin who thought it demeaning to have a servant present at such a meeting. The sheikh raised his hand, and the whispers ceased. His voice carried the weight of command, even though he spoke softly. "You are all here," he said, pausing as if to measure their worth, "because you believe you deserve something from me." The room shifted. A nephew leaned forward eagerly. A daughter folded her arms, impatient. A lawyer adjusted his papers. "But tell me," Sheikh Ibrahim continued, his eyes moving slowly across the room, "what is it that you truly deserve?" Silence. No one spoke, for no one knew if the sheikh expected flattery, loyalty, or truth. Finally, one of the older sons cleared his throat. "Father, we are your blood. We have worked to preserve the family name. We deserve to inherit what you have built." Murmurs of agreement followed. Another spoke. "We are educated, experienced. We can expand the empire." Another cousin added, "We have waited. We have proven ourselves loyal." The sheikh's lips curled, almost into a smile, but not quite. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Loyalty, patience, education, these are fine words. But words are nothing without depth." He paused, letting the silence thicken until the chandeliers seemed to hum. Then, with deliberate clarity, he switched his language. "Hey." The room froze. His words, delivered in flawless Arabic, cut like a blade through the air. He had not spoken in English, French, or any of the other languages his family paraded in their international meetings. He had spoken in the pure, old Arabic of their forefathers, a tongue heavy with heritage, poetry, and pride. The guests exchanged nervous glances. A son shifted in his seat. A niece fumbled with her phone, pretending to check a message. A nephew cleared his throat as if to respond, then stopped, his lips parting with nothing but hesitation. The Sheikh's gaze swept across them, disappointment settling deep into his expression. "None of you," he said in Arabic, his voice firm. "None of you understand. You sit in your suits, carrying my name, but cannot carry my tongue." Embarrassed coughs filled the hall. Some tried to mask their ignorance with nervous laughter. A cousin whispered to another in English. What did he say? It was then, from the far side of the room, a soft voice rose, clear, steady, unafraid. Every head turned. The tray of dates and water trembled slightly in Layla's hands, but her voice did not. She repeated the Sheikh's words, then continued in Arabic. "You asked, who among you truly understands the language of his ancestors? The answer is, very few." A hush fell over the hall, the kind that pressed against the skin, heavy and unshakable. The sons, the daughters, the heirs in their silk and gold stared at her, the maid they had never truly seen, speaking with fluency that none of them possessed. The Sheikh's eyes, sharp and glimmering, locked on Layla. For the first time that day he smiled, not mockingly, not politely, but with the satisfaction of a man who had waited for this very moment. "Come forward," he commanded. Layla hesitated, her heart pounding, but she obeyed. She set the tray gently upon a table and walked to the front of the hall, every step echoing louder than the last. She bowed her head respectfully before the Sheikh, but her presence was no longer invisible. She stood taller, her grey uniform suddenly commanding more attention than all the embroidered gowns in the room. Sheikh Ibrahim turned back to his family, his voice cutting through their shame. "Here is your lesson. A stranger, a servant among you, carries what you have abandoned, my tongue, my heritage. My bloodline is not defined by wealth, but by knowledge, by respect, by roots." Not a sound escaped the heirs, some flushed with anger, others with humiliation, but none could argue. Layla kept her eyes lowered, not daring to meet the glares boring into her from every direction. She had not intended to reveal herself. She had lived quietly, worked quietly, and spoken little. Yet when the Sheikh had asked his question, something in her heart would not let her remain silent. The Sheikh studied her a moment longer, then spoke softly. "Tell me, child, where did you learn?" Her lips trembled, but she answered, still in Arabic, "From my grandmother. She raised me on stories, on prayers, on poetry. She told me never to forget." The Sheikh nodded slowly, as though confirming something he had long suspected. Then he leaned back into his throne and looked over the room. "Perhaps," he said, "you should all ask yourselves why a maid has kept alive what you, heirs of my name, have let die." The silence in the hall was no longer embarrassed. It was suffocating. A truth too sharp to be ignored had been spoken, and it had come not from silk or gold, but from grey linen and quiet strength, and in that silence, Layla realized her life inside this palace would never again be the same. The silence in the hall lingered long after Layla's voice had faded. For a full minute, no one moved, no one dared breathe too loudly. The air was thick with humiliation for the heirs, and something far more dangerous, curiosity, for the Sheikh. Sheikh Ibrahim's eyes studied Layla with an intensity that made her shift uncomfortably. She was not supposed to be here, not at the center of attention, not standing where only family and lawyers usually stood. She was a maid, a shadow. Someone who poured tea and cleaned corners no one looked at. Yet now, all eyes were locked on her. "Sit," the sheikh commanded finally, pointing not to the back of the room, but to a chair placed near his right hand. Gasps rippled through the gathering. To be invited to sit beside him was an honor reserved only for trusted advisors or family members of high regard. Layla froze. "My lord," she whispered, lowering her head, "I am not worthy." "Sit," he repeated, more firmly this time. And she obeyed. Her steps felt heavy as she crossed the space between the heirs and the throne. She could feel their glares piercing into her back. Disbelief, resentment, even hatred. When she finally sat, her hands folded tightly in her lap, the sheikh leaned slightly toward her. "You carry something precious," he said quietly in Arabic, so only she could hear. "Do not underestimate its value." Layla nodded, though she did not understand why he was elevating her so. She wanted nothing but to remain unseen, to keep her life simple. But the sheikh's test had pulled her from the shadows, and there was no return. He turned back to the gathering. His voice thundered now, in English so that no one would pretend not to understand. "You came here today for inheritance. You thought I would distribute wealth and property as if my empire were a platter of meat to be divided among vultures. But inheritance," he paused, letting his words strike, "is not given to those who simply wait for it. It is given to those who are worthy." The eldest son, Khalid, could no longer contain his irritation. He rose abruptly, his designer suit straining at the shoulders, his jaw tight. "Father, with all due respect, we are worthy. We are your children. Blood cannot be questioned. Are you saying a servant has more claim than us?" He gestured angrily at Layla. The sheikh's eyes burned into him. "Sit down." But Khalid's pride would not allow him silence. "This is an insult. We studied abroad, we worked in your companies, we carried your name into every boardroom, every gala. You carried my name," Sheikh Ibrahim cut in sharply, "but not my values. You wear the attire of leaders, but lack their heart. Tell me, Khalid, when did you last sit with the men who work in the heat of the desert for our oil? When did you last speak to the villagers whose land sustains our crops? When did you last kneel in prayer beside the workers who clean your towers?" Khalid faltered. His lips parted, but no answer came. His silence was louder than words. The sheikh leaned back, disappointment shadowing his face. "That is what I thought." The heirs shifted uneasily. The second daughter, Yasmin, tried to recover the moment, her voice smooth. Calculated. "Father, surely you cannot mean to compare us to staff. We represent your legacy to the world. A maid," she glanced at Layla with thinly veiled disdain, "is just a maid. She has no claim." Layla lowered her head, trying to shrink into the chair, but the sheikh spoke before she could. "And yet she has preserved what you have abandoned. Your grandmother, my mother, recited poetry in Arabic every night before she slept. She told me that the one who forgets his tongue has forgotten his soul. Tell me, Yasmin, can you recite even a single verse she loved?" Oh, Yasmin's face reddened. She looked down at her hands. I don't remember." The sheikh's laughter was bitter. "Of course you do not." The hall grew colder, the shame deepening with every moment. Then the sheikh gestured to Layla. "Child, do you know the poem of Al-Mutanabe my mother cherished?" Layla hesitated but then nodded. Slowly, softly, she began to recite in Arabic, her voice weaving through the hall like music. "Ki Ich see her easy in Dixon buns, you feel good knows any vinmentionize. Her words flowed like water, ancient and alive. Some in the hall shifted uncomfortably, others lowered their gaze. By the time she finished the verse, the Sheikh's eyes were moist. He closed them briefly, as if transported back to another time, another life, when his mother's voice had carried those very lines. When he opened them again, his decision was made. "You think inheritance is gold," he said, his voice sharp as steel. "But gold is useless in the hands of the foolish. Wealth is dust if the heirs do not have wisdom. I will not leave my empire to vultures." Murmurs erupted. The heirs leaned toward one another, whispering furiously. The lawyer at the table looked as though he'd rather sink into the floor than be seen. Khalid stood again, his face red with fury. "So what, father? You will leave it to her? To a servant? Do you realize what you're saying? This is madness." The Sheikh's eyes flashed. "Do not raise your voice to me." The command carried the weight of thunder, and Khalid froze, his anger choking him silent. Then Ibrahim leaned forward, his gaze sweeping the hall. "Do not misunderstand me. Layla is not here to claim riches. She has not asked for them, nor will I burden her with them. But she has reminded me of something you all needed to hear. Inheritance is not money. Inheritance is language. It is respect. It is faith. And the one who forgets these things has already lost everything, no matter how much gold fills his pocket." He paused, then gestured toward Layla again. "She will remain in this palace, not as a maid, but as a custodian of heritage. She will teach Arabic to every child in this family, and if you resist, if you mock her again, you resist me." The words struck like lightning. The heirs' faces twisted with shock, some with fury, others with disbelief. A maid elevated above them? To instruct their children, it was unthinkable. But none dared challenge him further. Layla's heart raced. She wanted to protest, to say she was unworthy, that she was not a teacher, that she had no place in such matters. But when she looked into the Sheikh's eyes, she saw resolve that could not be broken. He had chosen her, not out of charity, but because she carried something they had lost. The meeting dissolved into silence, the heirs leaving in stiff anger, their pride wounded deeper than any fortune lost. Lawyers gathered papers quietly. Servants rushed to clear trays. But as the hall emptied, Sheikh Ibrahim leaned toward Layla once more. "You think I elevated you today," he said softly, "but in truth, you elevated me. You reminded me who I am, and who I must ensure they become. Do not be afraid, child. You were brought here for a reason." Layla swallowed, her throat tight. "But, my lord, I am only a maid." The Sheikh's smile was warm now, tender. "No, Layla, today, you became the voice of our ancestors." For the first time, she lifted her head, her eyes meeting his. In them was a strength she had not known she possessed, and a future she could not yet imagine. And so, the maid who once walked invisible through the palace halls now carried within her the most powerful inheritance of all, truth, and just like that, the Sheikh's true heir was not the wealth, hungry children who wore his name, but the maid who carried his legacy in her heart. Sometimes, the greatest treasures are not measured in gold, but in the values we preserve. If you were moved by this story, make sure to hit subscribe and join us for more powerful stories of justice, truth, and hidden strength. Your support helps keep these stories alive.